An absolutely massive food trade war has suddenly intensified. In the first week of May, China, Europe, and India have simultaneously triggered what is being described as the largest food trade conflict in modern history, which some observers have dubbed the mother of all food trade wars. Join us in this video as we highlight the latest developments and fallout from this conflict, in which the supply of food is the main weapon, and discuss how this will affect the Caribbean region. Let's jump in. The global food trade war, which is a direct blowback from the disastrous worldwide tariffs imposed by US President Donald Trump, are causing havoc across the world. This is characterized by the following. Major export bans and harsh tariffs. China has imposed a 34% tariff on all US imports, making American agricultural exports like corn, soybeans, wheat, pork, and dairy financially unviable for Chinese buyers. Canada has also been targeted with tariffs on canola oil, peas, pork, and seafood. Retaliatory measures and trade fragmentation. The European Union responded to US metal tariffs by imposing a 25% tariff on American corn, forcing European buyers to seek costlier alternatives from Brazil and Ukraine. India, the world's largest rice exporter, has banned all exports of non-basmati white rice, causing global rice prices to spike and leading to panic buying and hoarding in several countries. Supply chain breakdowns. These protectionist moves have disrupted global food supply chains, leading to soaring prices, unsold crops, port backlogs, and hoarding. The most vulnerable regions are already experiencing shortages, rationing, and even civil unrest. A global food inflation and insecurity. Food prices are rising sharply worldwide. In some countries, food inflation has exceeded 15%, and the UN warns that over 100 million people could face acute food insecurity by summer if trade flows are not restored. Impact on the Caribbean region. The Caribbean is particularly vulnerable to these global disruptions due to its heavy reliance on food imports. Rising food prices and inflation. The Caribbean imports more than 60% of its food, with some countries importing over 80%. As global prices rise due to export bans and tariffs, the cost of imported food in the region will increase sharply, worsening already high living costs. Many goods imported into the Caribbean arrive via the US. With the US imposing steep tariffs on Chinese goods and facing its own export barriers, prices for food and other essentials in the Caribbean are expected to rise further, especially as these costs are passed down the supply chain. Supply chain disruptions. Caribbean businesses and consumers are likely to face delays and shortages of essential goods. The region's dependence on US and global supply chains means disruptions elsewhere quickly translate into local scarcities and higher prices. Shipping costs, already high in the Caribbean, may increase further due to additional fees and logistical challenges, particularly if new tariffs or surcharges are imposed on Chinese-built ships or goods routed through the US. Economic and social strain. Higher food prices and scarcity could lead to increased social unrest and hardship, especially among the most vulnerable populations. Food insecurity may worsen, and local food banks and social services could come under severe strain. Tourism, a major economic pillar, could also suffer if economic uncertainty in source markets, like the US, Canada, and Europe, reduces visitor numbers, further straining local economies. Calls for regional self-sufficiency. Caribbean leaders are urging greater investment in local agriculture and food production to reduce reliance on imports and cushion the impact of global shocks. Initiatives like CARICOM's goal to reduce the region's food import bill by 25% by 2025 are becoming even more urgent. There is also a push to diversify trade partners and strengthen ties with Africa, Central and Latin America, and long-standing allies in Europe and Canada to mitigate overdependence on any single market. Here is a visual summary on the main impacts this will have on the Caribbean. Specific food imports. The ongoing food trade war involving China, Europe, and India is set to disrupt several critical food import categories for the Caribbean region. The Caribbean's high dependence on imported food, especially grains, edible oils, and animal proteins, makes it particularly vulnerable to these global trade shocks. Key food imports likely to be impacted. 1. Grains. Rice. India's ban on non-basmati white rice exports has already led to global price spikes. The Caribbean, which relies on rice imports from Asia, will face higher prices and potential supply gaps. Wheat. The Caribbean imports large quantities of wheat, mainly for bread and other staples. Disruptions in global grain trade, such as tariffs on US corn and wheat, and increased competition for Brazilian and Ukrainian supply, will likely make wheat imports more expensive and less reliable. Corn, used both for direct consumption and as animal feed, corn imports are at risk due to EU tariffs on US corn and the resulting scramble for alternative suppliers. This will push up prices and could cause shortages. 2. Animal proteins. Pork and poultry. China's new tariffs on US and Canadian pork and poultry have redirected global supplies, increasing competition and prices. The Caribbean, which imports significant quantities of pork and poultry, will face higher costs and possible shortages as supplies are diverted to larger markets like China. Seafood. Canadian seafood, including crab and lobster, is now subject to steep Chinese tariffs, leading to market distortions and potential price hikes for Caribbean importers who source from North America. 3. Edible oils. China's 100% tariff on Canadian canola oil is causing global supply disruptions. The Caribbean, which imports edible oils primarily from North America, will see higher prices and tighter supply. Other vegetable oils. Any disruption in global edible oil trade, whether from Canada, the US, or Asia, will impact Caribbean importers and consumers. 4. Soybeans and soy products. Soybeans, used for both human consumption and animal feed, soybeans are a staple import for the region. China's pivot from US to Brazilian soybeans is causing congestion and price increases in Brazil, affecting global availability and cost. Soybean oil and meal. These processed products are also likely to become more expensive and harder to source as global supply chains are disrupted. 5. Other affected imports. Peas and pulses. Canadian peas, now subject to Chinese tariffs, could see price volatility and supply constraints that ripple into Caribbean markets. Processed foods. Many processed foods imported into the Caribbean rely on affected raw materials, wheat, corn, soy, oils, so their prices are expected to rise as well. Additional factors. Indirect price increases. Many Caribbean imports are routed through the US. With the US imposing high tariffs on Chinese goods and facing its own export barriers, the cost of goods re-exported to the Caribbean will rise, compounding the impact of direct trade disruptions. Shipping costs. Increased demand for Brazilian and other alternative suppliers is causing port congestion and higher freight rates, further raising the cost of food imports for the Caribbean. In summary, the Caribbean will be most affected in its imports of wheat, corn, rice, edible oils, especially canola and soybean oil, pork, poultry, seafood, soybeans, and processed foods that rely on these ingredients. The region faces higher prices, potential shortages, and increased volatility in these key food categories as a direct result of the ongoing global food trade war. The food trade war among China, Europe, and India is sending shockwaves through global supply chains, and the Caribbean, highly dependent on food imports, is already feeling the effects. The region faces higher prices, potential shortages, and economic strain, highlighting the urgent need for greater self-sufficiency and diversified trade relationships. The fallout from this global food trade war will be especially severe among the poor and disadvantaged. This means that quote-unquote ghetto areas in the Caribbean like Laventille in Trinidad, Trenchtown in Jamaica, and Silver Lake in Dominica, as well as similar locations across the region, will experience crushing economic pain. This could lead to spikes in crime and violence, and fuel social unrest. As the Mighty Sparrow sang in one of his popular calypsos, a hungry man is indeed an angry man. Governments in the region, including the newly installed UNC administration in Trinidad and Tobago, may be forced to drastically trim development plans, while OECS countries like St. Lucia and others need to rapidly expand local food production and supercharge efforts to modify consumer tastes, from imported food products to what is grown locally and regionally. In effect, we must earnestly learn to eat what we grow, and grow what we eat. Without swift adaptation, the Caribbean could see its food security and economic stability further threatened in the months ahead. Thanks for staying with us to the end of this video. Like, share and comment on the issues raised here, and remember to subscribe to our channel for more informative videos on the Caribbean and other trending topics. See you in the next video.